You spent years learning to read the charts. You know the concepts inside out, and you still can't put together 2 consistent weeks. One bad morning wipes out all the progress you made in the last 2 weeks. What if the problem was never you? What if you just never had a system that runs repeatably every single morning? That's why I built the FlowState OS app. It builds your game plan before the market even opens. It feeds you with key levels live, then it runs through every trade and every execution in a mechanical decision tree. The bolt breakout blueprint, the 4-step system, the real-time read recipe. All of these wipe out emotion so there's no more guessing and no more gambling. A simple tick box exercise to pull the trigger at the right time. This is groundbreaking technology and it will finally make you consistent. If that sounds like you, then take a notepad and pen and let's get started. Alright, welcome back to the channel. And so in this video, I'm going to be diving into the FlowState OS app. This is an app that I've been designing at Price Action Labs that basically takes the premium footprint execution process and it turns it into a repeatable, mechanical, and scalable system. So how this works is it starts with something called the trader's terminal, which basically gives you 3 things. First is preparation and key levels. Now, specifically when it comes to doing a pre-market plan, this is called the premium pre-market playbook. And this is going to have essentially 3 components to it. The first is key levels using the 4-step positioning process, followed by the V3 volume vault. Then you're going to go on to the strike sheet, which tells you which key level to trade, at what time, and at what area based on volume. And when price comes into your key level, you're going to be equipped with the bolt breakout blueprint. It's going to tell you exactly what time to trade with what entry model based on price, time, and volume. So the way I want you to think of the FlowState app, it's like almost taking a flight and going to an airport. This is the trader's terminal. So you need to know 3 things: the time, the ticket, and the overall location, right? Where are you looking to go? And so the FlowState app gives you the clarity right off the bat, okay? So how does it do that? So first of all, everything's going to be mechanical, systematic, and it's going to follow a process. And so when it comes to the entry model side of things, there is something called the bolt breakout blueprint. This is the entry model that I use that I've now systemized, and it's been coded into the FlowState OS app. So when I look for an entry, I look for a break, an optimal retest, a liquidity absorption using order flow, and then I pull the trigger. This is basically bridging the gap between being confused with order flow and how to use order flow effectively when you execute on the lower time frames. The FlowState OS app is going to be your all-in-one inbuilt software to take you from planning levels to executing and exiting a trade. Okay, so let's get into it. So the reason why I built the FlowState app is because there was a problem that I had early on, and it still happens to me time to time, and I see it happen with a lot of traders. The problem I often see is that traders have good knowledge, good rules, and an overall good read of price. But they still end up breaking rules, missing good moves, and even worse, missing moves, losing money, and then watching the move go on without them. This has happened to me lots of times, and I've built the FlowState OS software as a way of basically destroying this problem. So how do we do that? The way we do that is through building systems. Now, the biggest pain is watching good trades happen without you. This is worse than breaking your rules and losing in the first place. So if you're a trader who has good rules, you have kind of good execution, but you struggle to do that consistently, by the end of this video, you will have access to a system and the FlowState OS app, which will allow you to get rid of this problem. And we first start by doing something called the premium pre-market playbook. So before 9:30 Eastern, before that opening bell, if you're a futures trader for US 30, ES, S&P 500, NASDAQ, etc., the premium pre-market playbook has 3 simple steps that will stop you from breaking your rules and giving you maximum clarity, all before 9:30 Eastern. So how we do that is by using the T3 trading terminal. And so there's 3 things I want you to understand, right? Imagine you are going on a flight. Imagine you're going on a holiday, right? When you go into an airport, there are 3 things that you need in order to end up at the right place. First is your ticket, right? Think of your ticket as your rough idea of direction. So for example, if you're flying from, let's say, America to New Zealand, the ticket must say Auckland. It must say New Zealand, right? The ticket has to give you some kind of clarity as to which direction you're going. You don't want to fly from California and end up in Zimbabwe, right? So your ticket is essentially a rough indication of market direction. So this is things like structure, premium discount, key levels. The ticket is basically your market direction, and it's important for you to get that right before the session begins, right? The next thing to understand is time, and we're going to be going into time in a lot of detail, because what time you trade between 9:30 to 11 ultimately determines a lot of your success. If you're trading at the wrong time, but you have the right level and the right entry model, it's very painful because it's hard for you to catch the moves if you're taking them at the wrong time. And the final thing is terminal. So when you go into the airport, right, you've got to know what terminal to use, right? Is it going to be the first terminal, terminal ABC, gate ABC, etc., etc.? So having the right ticket, the right time, and the right terminal for your flight will ensure that you get to the right place at the right time. And it's roughly the same thing with trading, right? You've got to have good market direction, you've got to trade at the right time and at the right key level. So this is what I call a T3 trading terminal. Okay, so again, another problem that I notice is that traders don't have a clear way to find support and resistance areas. So what we're going to do is we're going to first focus on key levels. This is basically ensuring that you arrive at the right terminal, or from a trading perspective, making sure your support and resistance or your supply and demand zones are at the right place on the charts, right? There is a specific way to find key levels, and I promise you, if you can master it, or you will master it at the end of this video, if you can master finding your key level, that is 70, if not 80% of the work right there, right? And so the problem I see with traders finding key levels is that they will use lines, patterns, indicators. They will use anything but the right mechanical process. And so here's the thing I want you to take away. Finding key levels should be the same process you follow every day. It's a process that the FlowState OS app has inbuilt in, and it will force you to follow those rules every single day. Okay, no more lines, no more guesswork, no more indicators, none of that stuff, right? You've got to have a mechanical set of rules that stops you from guessing, right? And so what the fix is a mechanical step-by-step rule set, which is what I'm going to introduce you to now. And this is the 4-step positioning process, okay? The 4-step positioning process comes down to essentially these 4 steps. So it's going to be market structure, or structure for short, targeted liquidity, equilibrium, and price imbalance, right? The exact screenshot you see on the screen. Structure, targeted liquidity, equilibrium, and price imbalance. When you know how to use all 4 of these steps in the right order, it will become a lot easier, systematic, straightforward, and stress-free when it comes to finding your key levels. And so the FlowState OS app forces you to get very clear on where the highs and lows are. You enter them down to the point. Right, so this is an ES example, or an S&P 500 futures example I'm showing you, but you can apply this to any market you want. Gold, futures, Forex. If you're a US stock market trader, whether it's options, futures, it even works on some Forex pairs as well. Once you implement the 4-step positioning process, finding support and resistance, or as I like to call them, supply and demand zones, will become much easier. And this is 70% of the battle. Then you're going to log the points, like you see over here. And then you're going to determine your key levels. So before we go on and look further on in the presentation, I just want to present to you what it looks like. This is the FlowState OS app, and this is now the trader's terminal. So you have 3 steps in the same sequence every session. And so the reason I'm excited to share this is because this is the first of its industry. This is the first in the industry. This is the first of its time. The FlowState OS software, or the FlowState OS app, will force you to get clear, concise, and have huge amounts of clarity when it comes to execution. So one thing I often say at the start is, let's say you're watching this at 9:30 Eastern, I will say something like, I blew more accounts than I'd like to admit. You don't have to do that. The way you do that is by basically having a good preparation planning stage, or I call it prepare your premium pre-market playbook. Now, what makes a pre-market playbook premium? It's making sure you have the right things inside. And what we do is we start by looking at key levels and volume. So the key levels has the 4-step positioning process, which I've just gone through, and I'm going to show you how the app works. Then we have the V3 volume vault. So let's say we click on key levels. Now, when we click on key levels, the system will prompt you to follow the rules and find key levels with extreme levels of accuracy. I'm talking 80-90% strike hits, right? Strike rates. If you know where the right key level is, your 70% of the work is done. So if you're struggling with any kind of, breaking your rules, emotion, overtrading, regulating any kind of emotional barriers, the FlowState OS app will do that. And it comes down to finding key levels. Defining key levels makes up 70% of your trading process. Get this part right, and your execution will become simple, smooth, and stress-free. And this is exactly what we're looking for. So the framework that I'm going to introduce you to is, again, the 4-step positioning process. So how does it work? So we're going to tap to begin, and now we have presented here the 4 steps. Right, you have to follow these steps. Notice how it says always start here. The system, or the FlowState OS app, will make you follow these rules with so much clarity, you'll be laughing at why you weren't doing it before. So we're going to get into it right now. So when we click on structure, we want to identify the last 2 cycles of structure. Very simple. So this may look very basic, very baby pips type, but you'll be surprised at the number of people who overlook this and then they wonder why their key levels are mistaken. Here's the first thing I want you to remember. If you are struggling with any kind of emotional barrier, overtrading, revenge trading, all of these kind of problems that people have, it can be fixed with a mechanical process that tells you where to trade. This is good positioning. Okay? So let's take an example on the chart. So this is ES futures on the 15-minute time frame. So on the 15-minute time frame, what we can see here is this, right? We can see bullish structure. Okay, we can obviously see, highs and lows, and then we see a new high over here. So how does this translate to the FlowState OS app? So the FlowState OS app, you're going to click bullish, and then what it's going to do is the system is going to force you to put in the highs and lows, right? Now, these highs and lows specifically come from this market structure over here. Okay, so yes, it takes a little bit of practice. You've got to understand how to mark up structure correctly. But once you've marked up structure, you simply want to type in the numbers, right? So I'm going to quickly go through this because I kind of remember the numbers because this is the only market I trade. So 73.55, and then it's going to be 74.45, 35, and then this was 24 roughly, right? So I'm just going to skip past them because this is just for illustration purposes. So what the system will do is it will capture the cycle and the cycle, right? There's 2 cycles to structure, the same as what I've illustrated here. Now, once you've gone through structure, the system will prompt you to go and look at targeted liquidity, which is essentially the most recent low and the most recent high, right? The reason why we do this is because you want to get clear on where the dealing range is, right? So remember, structure is what the highs and lows stand for. The T is targeted liquidity. This is the most recent high and the most recent low. Next is E, which is equilibrium. Okay, that is the midpoint between the high and the low. So when we look at the system, or what the FlowState OS software prompts you to do, once you've understood where your highs and lows are, we now move on to equilibrium. So premium is above the line, discount is below, right? So this is our low, this is our high. The system calculates your equilibrium for you, okay? Here's your equilibrium. So high plus low divided by 2, there's your equilibrium. Now, once you've accepted the equilibrium, you now move on to price imbalance. So this here is where I get lots of questions, and I just want to make it clear how I find my key levels. I'm only going to show one example on the screen. And this is now the 4th step, or this is P. This is your price imbalance, otherwise known as your FVG, right? Your 15-minute fair value gap, basically. So I'm going to be quickly breaking down how I do this, just on 1, maybe 2 key levels, right? See, these are some of the key levels that I have. So one key level here, for example, the price imbalance was here. Okay, this is the candle right there. We choose the price imbalance. There's one fair value gap there. There's one price imbalance, right? Let's zoom in. It's this one here. So the system essentially tells you what to do. You want to find a price imbalance. You want to locate the candle before. Then you want to identify its high and low. And once you do that, you want to click continue. So are we in premium or are we in discount? Right, the system will prompt you to re-look at that because, of course, premium and discount is very important. So when we look here at the charts right now, what we can see here is this. Okay, we see the 50% area and we're above that. So we're in premium. And these are our key levels here: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., like this. Now, it's important to understand that the system will prompt you to put in the most recent low and the most recent high of the key level. So this is going to be 67.20 to 67.16, just as one example, right? I'm going to quickly speed this up. So we're in premium, and you obviously want to type in the level. So 67.24 and then 67, let's say 16 or whatever it was, right? You want to get very clear on where your levels are, right? And here's another arbitrary level that I typed in earlier. And once you have at least 2 levels, you want to then move on to, you want to go back to the trader's terminal. Again, remember, this is like an airport, right? It's your job to type in all the data so that the system can tell you what to do. All right. So we've gone through key levels, right? Let's go back to our presentation, right? Let's go back here. So the 4-step positioning process, again: structure, targeted liquidity, equilibrium, and price imbalance. Now, I want you to think of your key level, because I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about key levels. I want you to think of your key levels as like basically 4 legs to a table. If one leg is missing, there is a problem. So structure is going to be your first leg. That's the S. Next is T, targeted liquidity. Next is equilibrium. And next is price imbalance. So notice how I've gone through all 4 steps in the system, and notice how the FlowState OS app took you through all 4 steps in the system. And that is where your key level essentially lies, right? Your key level lies on top of the 4 steps, exactly like 4 legs to a table. All right. And your trade is on top of the key level. So hopefully you can see from this analogy that if one leg is wrong, one leg is missing, one leg is unstable, the entire table will become unstable. Okay. Likewise, your trade is at your level. And so if one of the components to your key level, or how you identify the key level, is missing, your key level is not going to work. Therefore, your trade is not going to be as accurate as you'd like it to be. And so by using the 4-step positioning process, you can essentially stop your table from wobbling or stop your trade from being inaccurate, if that makes sense, right? Next, we move on to what we call the V3 volume vault. So the V3 volume vault comes down to 3 things. First, you want to know where your high value areas are. So essentially your high value area high, your high value area low, and your point of control. And so here's what a volume profile looks like. And so you want to obviously have your high volume area high, high volume area low. So you want to be identifying where there could be potential chop and where there's not going to be potential chop. And so how this looks in terms of the actual system is like this. So we've done our key levels. We now want to move on to the V3 volume vault. All right. So the V3 volume vault essentially gives you an idea of what a market profile will look like, and the system is going to prompt you to put in the high volume area high. So how does this work from a charting perspective? So here I'm recording this on the 3rd of June 2026. So if we look at the most recent chart over here, so let's actually zoom in on this, right? Let's zoom in on this. So if we look here at the most recent chart, let me just zoom out of that. That's better. So let's switch on market profile, right? Let's look at market profile right now. So what do we see here? Okay, this is a bit messy, but I will just show you here. So what do we see here? So if we just take a look here, right? Let's remove these. What does the market profile essentially show you? Market profile basically shows you this. It shows you where the low volume area is, where the high volume area is, and where is the high volume area. So this is MPO/TPO. So when you click on MPO/TPO, you want the time frame to be the daily time frame. No other time frame is needed. You want the percentage of the value area to be 70. So what does this mean? What this means is the blue area represents 70% of the volume of the previous day. Right? I'll break down what that means. And of course, the gray areas together represent only 30%. Right? So you should understand simply that the blue area is the high volume area. Okay, that's all you want. That's all you want to kind of understand. Okay, so once we've gone through this, let's break this down. When we look at it this way, this is now the volume This is now Wednesday. Okay, this is the volume profile for Tuesday. Right, this was Tuesday. And then this was obviously the volume profile presented on Tuesday. This represents the volume distribution for Monday, right? So it's always one day before. So for example, if I'm looking to trade on Wednesday, the 2nd of June, this market profile is actually from Tuesday, right? That's all you want to understand. And so the system is going to prompt you to put in the high volume area high, high volume area low, and of course the POC. So these are the three things you need, and together they form the V3 volume vault. Why is it 3? Because you want to know where the highest volume is, you want to know where the high of the high volume area is and where the low of the high volume area is. This is 70%, right, of the previous day's volume. So on Wednesday, you need to know where the high volume areas were, all right? This is the low volume area, okay? So why is this important? So I am going to break down exactly why this was important. I think this is very important. So if we go back to now the FlowState OS app, right? The FlowState OS app is going to force us to put in the correct data, all right? So the high volume area high, 67.12. So if we go back here and we type in 67.12, all right, set. Now the low volume area is the same principle. It's just going to be the low volume area. So this is going to be 75.76, right? 75.76, 75.76. And then the point of control is going to be that yellow line. So the point of control, I make that 76.25, right? 7600.25. So you type in 7600.25, right? And so once all three of them are done, notice how the system, the FlowState OS app, is forcing you to enter in the correct information at the right time in a mechanical-based system. This is very important because the FlowState OS app is designed in a way to follow the processes you need to find the right level to trade at the right time with the correct entry confirmation. Okay? So once we've done that, we want to return to the hub. We want to return to the trader's terminal. Now, once you've gone through the key levels, once you've gone through the V3 volume vault, we now have the strike sheet. Okay? Now, the strike sheet gives you very important information for that session. And here is what it breaks down, right? So it's giving you the high volume area high and the high volume area low based off the numbers you gave it. So this is now 67.12 and 76.12 to 75.76. So it's essentially this area here, right? This blue area here. This is the high volume area. Okay, this is the high volume area. So why does the system make you put this in? So I believe that volume is absolutely key, right? So here's your first key level. Remember we typed in this key level 67.20 to 75.16, right? This is a typo. Ignore this. Should be 67.16. In fact, if you do make a mistake, you can actually go back and you can change it, right? So you can go all the way back to Trader's Terminal. You can go to key levels and you can change your key levels. So based on price imbalance here, you can go back and change it. So if you go back here, for example, you can go and change that to premium. This should be 76.15. Okay, so the system is flexible. It allows you to change. So now from here, we've typed in our key levels. We've now done our volume. We're now back to the strike sheet. So what does the strike sheet tell us? The strike sheet tells us this key level from 67.20 to 76.15. It shows us the plan. So for example, if this key level is outside of a high volume area, it sits outside of the high volume area, which means by definition, it sits outside of this blue region here, right? This blue region here. If it's outside the blue region, it's in a low volume area. This is a high volume area. Okay, very important to understand. And we treat the high volume areas differently to the low volume areas. Okay, the strike sheet forces you to get clear on that. Okay, so here's the plan. The plan is only when price reaches the level, so we're getting clarity on where to trade. You're only allowed to trade between 10 past 10 and 10:50, right? Why is that? Well, the reason why is because for those who understand volume, you will understand when the market is in an area of low volume, we will typically get chop, right? This is something that you can go and backtest. Right, here's a good example, right? So there are lots of examples on the charts you can use. for example, when you have areas of low volume, you will typically have chops. So here's an example. Here was a bank holiday. This was Monday bank holiday, 25th of May, right? This obviously corresponded to low volume, right? This is an example of low volume, just as an example here. That's just one example. Now, there are other examples we can go and back test. If we go here, here's another example here, right? So a lot of the chop that you see in the market, so this kind of choppy area here corresponds to low volume, right? Now, if you look here, for example, here's another good example here. If you look here, we were in an extremely low volume area here. This is now the gray area, which is only 30% of the day's volume, right? We had this major chop from, let's say, 1 a.m. UK time all the way to 1 p.m. the following day, right? So that's 12 hours of chop inside of a low volume area, right? So do you understand what I'm trying to say? What I'm trying to say is this, right? This is what I want to present to traders so they understand. When you are making a pre-market plan, right? So this is basically how the FlowState OS app system works. What we're doing is we're looking at a pre-market game plan. This is what the system is forcing you to get clear on. It's the pre-market game plan. So your pre-market game plan essentially will come down to three things, right? You want to get clear on your key levels. This is very important. So you want to get clear on your key levels. You then want to get clear on volume. So the high volume area, high volume area, low. This is the volume. And the next thing is you want to get clear on what times you are going to trade the levels. Okay, so what time? Time is important. So if we go a step deeper, let's go back to the app over here. So we have our level. This is the plan for key level 1. So the system is getting clear on where the key levels are based on volume and where you're allowed to trade them. All right. Now, if we look at the plan here, it's a similar plan. So 76.15 to 76.10. Right. What's interesting to see here is when price is outside of the key high volume areas, you're only allowed to trade between 10 past 10 and around 11 o'clock or 10:50 Eastern. You don't want to take trades past 10:50 Eastern on most days. And now you have a plan, right? Now you've got a plan. So you're no longer guessing. So the whole game, the reason why most traders never go far is because in order for you to go far, you want to trust your levels and do not force trades in areas of low volume or outside of key levels. So I have a rule: no level, no trade, right? No volume, cautious trading, right? And then I'll see you at the open. So all of this is done before 9:30 Eastern. And then we want to pick our execution window. And so this is what I'm going to explain. So when you form a pre-market plan, this is all done between 9 and 9:30. Right, this is all done between 9 and 9:30. This is all done between 9 and 9:30 Eastern. Okay, so if you come to 9:30 Eastern and you don't have your pre-market plan, this is a problem. You got to have your pre-market plan before 9:30 Eastern. Now, when 9:30 Eastern begins, you want to be trading at your key levels with volume and time. So how do we find key levels? So how we find key levels is by using the 4-step positioning process. So let's quickly go through that. The 4-step positioning, which I've been through already, the 4-step positioning process. Once you've gone through the 4-step positioning process, you then had what did we have after that? We had the V3 volume volt, right? And the final thing we had is time. And what we want to do is we want to split each session up into 3 individual chunks of 30. So what does that mean? So that means, let's say we have the first chunk, which is going to be 9:30 to 10. And then we have the second chunk, which is going to be 10 to 10:30 a.m. Eastern. Then we have the third chunk, which is going to be from 10:30 to 11 a.m. Eastern. So these are the 3 things you do to find a key level. Okay, so these are the 3 things you do to find a pre-market game plan. So if you're wondering how these 3 things connect, once you have a key level, you then want to pair that key level with volume and time. Okay, now this is essentially what the execution window does. So the session you want to split into 3 separate sessions, right? 9:30 to 10, 10 to 10:30, and 10:30 to 11. And this is something I'm going to give you a little bit of back testing to do, right? So we have the opening offense, which is the first half an hour, the mid-morning move, 10 to 10:30, and the final flush, 10:30 to 11. Which window you trade will come down to your pre-market plan, which we discussed up here. So once again, if let's say price taps into your key level 1, for example, you're only allowed to trade between 10 o'clock or 10:10 up to about 10:50. Okay, so that means if you took a trade in the opening offense session and you lost, that was your fault because you didn't follow the pre-market plan. Let's say now we get to 10:05 or let's say 12 past 10. This is now part of the mid-morning move. All right. So how does the entry model work? So I'll quickly go over the entry model to see how it works. But essentially, once you have your charts like this, so let's go back to the charts over here. Once you have your chart like this, for example, right, and you have your key levels, from here, it simply becomes a waiting game. It simply becomes a waiting game. So I'll just quickly go over a trade I took on Friday. Not the cleanest trade. We had a little bit of chop, wasn't happy, only a 1 hour risk to reward. But what we're essentially looking for is price has to tap into a key level, right? You then have to look for a series of entry model steps here. So I'm going to quickly break down how that works. So what the FlowState app will do is it will force you to answer the following questions to make sure your execution is as simple, streamlined, and as systematic as possible to ensure that you are following the rules and that you don't mess up on any step. So has price tapped into a key level? Well, here price has, right? So if we quickly break this down, I'm going to show you without the order flow in this video. But what we want to do here is, has price tagged into a key level? Yes. Price is tagged into a key level, okay? Now from here, do you understand the bolt breakout blueprint? So in other words, break, optimal retest, liquidity absorption, and then we pull the trigger. This is simply the framework you want to understand whenever price taps into a key level, okay? So yes, we continue. So now we begin 4 steps. So first we're looking for a break, okay? We have 2 rules around break. Has price broken outside with a body, right? Do you see a clear body break? Yes, you do, right? I'll quickly speed the steps up. Yes. Okay, continue to the next step. Is price inside an area of high volume? So in other words, what we're doing now, if we just take a look at market profile, for example, right? Market profile showed us one thing. So if we go to the 5-minute time frame, let's break this down. So is price in an area of high volume? Well, not really, right? This is the gray area. So this is what we call a low volume area. So if you ever wondered why the market chopped around so much here, right? Look at all this chop, right? We're linking volume to time. Okay, here's how we do it. So this is now an area of low volume. So when we go down now to the 1-minute time frame, what you want to understand here is that the move didn't happen, right? The move didn't happen until basically 11 o'clock Eastern. And this is what's very important to understand, right? When you're in an area of low volume, you're going to expect all this kind of chop, right? You want to give the trades time to basically work, time to breathe, time to build up the liquidity, build up the interest for a particular move to happen, because we're in an area of low volume. And the FlowState OS app will basically make you input the data so that you can identify these trading opportunities, right? So is price inside of an area of high volume? Now, if you say no, it's going to force you to wait. However, notice how we're inside of the right trading window, right? We're in the mid-morning flush. We're in the mid-morning move. So we're actually in the mid-morning move between 10 and 10:30, right? So the system will prompt you to stop trading, right? So it's going to force you to wait, okay? Now, I will not click yes to that because we are in an area of low volume. However, if you get the rest of the entry model between 10 and 10:30 Eastern, the mid-morning move, you can catch that trade. And that is essentially how this trade was taken, right? This trade I didn't execute until 7 past 11. So this was actually past 11 Eastern, right? The trade didn't start cooking until 10:52. Execution came at 10 past or almost 10 past 11, right? That's almost a 15-minute wait, right? When you're in an area of low volume, right? Low volume, you need to be patient, right? You got to be patient. And the FlowState OS app will force you to get clear, patient, and then execute with excellence. right? That is what the point of the FlowState OS app is for. So now with the optimal retest, do you see more than 3 candles? Yes. Do you see price mitigating at least 50% of the zone? So what does that mean? So for example, here you can see the zone is 93, 75.93 to 75.89. Hopefully you can see we mitigate the entire zone. So we mitigate 100% of the zone, right? We mitigate 100%. So is it at least 50%? Of course it is. Yes. Now liquidity absorption, this is where order flow meets the FlowState OS app. I'm going to make some future videos on how I actually integrate order flow into this, but I'm just going to say yes for now. But what we're looking for essentially is red delta before we take a buy trade, right? The reason why this is important is because I believe in order to have good execution, valid execution, you must have delta showing you the way, right? You've got to have aggressive sellers failing in order to take a buy trade. So I'm going to take yes to that. Now, the second thing is, do you see a 0? This is now a finished auction. I'm going to take yes for that. And once you've gone through all 4 steps and price passes above the trigger line, I'm going to quickly break down what that means. So your trigger line is essentially the break line. So if we just take a look at how this trade actually worked, right? What we saw was an initial break above our level, right? So do you all see this candle here? This candle broke above the zone. So in other words, when we look for our retest, at least 50% back in the zone, what we're really looking for is this, right? We want to see a 0 at the bottom. Ideally, we want to see zeros here, zeros here. As price passes the break line, right? So notice how this break line got made here at 52 past 10. The execution came at 7 past 11. This is where we pulled the trigger. So what we've really gone through is we've gone through the entire sort of entry model. We've gone through break, over here, we've gone through optimal retest. Liquidity absorption often happens, in these areas, these areas, these areas. And then when price passes the break line, we pull the trigger. And that is the entire entry model using both a mechanical system mixed in with order flow. And that's what the FlowState OS app basically does, right? And once price passes above the trigger line, you then pull the trigger, okay? And the final thing is you want to reflect. So did you follow the process, right? Were you locked in mostly or you got lost? So let's say you were locked in, right? Let's say you were locked in, okay, right? It's going to give you your instructions, right? So that is the FlowState OS app, right? I just want to kind of sum up what we've been through in this video. So quickly just summing things up. So it's essentially, think of it as like a trader's airport. So when you come into an airport, you got to know where you're going, right? Where is the destination? Where are you starting? What directions are you going to follow to make sure you get there? So we do that. So the FlowState OS app forces you to get clear on the systems so that you can prepare your levels, prepare your strike rate, and then execute with excellence, right? How do we do that? We do that with inbuilt systems like the 4-step positioning process and the Bolt breakout blueprint. So break, optimal retest, liquidity absorption, and then we pull the trigger. Order flow and footprint charts are essential to make the system work. You cannot trade it without order flow and footprint charts. And the FlowState OS app gives you direct instructions on how to do that. Okay? So again, if you have a problem of breaking your rules and you watch trades happen without you every single day, the premium pre-market playbook is a set of instructions and a system which the application or the app is going to make you follow inside of FlowState OS to ensure that you never miss a step. And so the T3 trading terminal is essentially, I want you to remember this, time, ticket, and terminal, or it should really be terminal, ticket, and time. So you want to have the right ticket to make sure you're going in the right direction, the overall market direction. You want to have the right times. You want to make sure you're trading in the right session within the session, right? 9:30 to 10, 10 to 10:30, 10:30 to 11. And then terminal, making sure you're actually going in the right line, the right lane, the right direction, right? Just remember terminal, ticket, and time. Or you can remember them in any order, right? Terminal, time, ticket. You want to have the right direction, the right time, and at the right place. Okay? So again, support and resistance, or supply and demand, like I like to call it. The problem with a lot of traders is that they will use lagging indicators, random lines, patterns. They will use anything but a mechanical process that's backed by order flow to find their levels. And I promise you now, you cannot trade without a mechanical system that's backed up by order flow. You just cannot do that. Okay? So you want to have a mechanical step-by-step set of rules that you're always going to follow. And so the 4-step positioning process essentially forces you to do that. The system, the FlowState OS app, is going to force you to type in all of your structural points, all of your highs and lows. It's going to calculate your premium or discount, your equilibrium. It will calculate everything you need so you can execute at the right level. Okay? And so what I'm going to leave you on is how systems work, right? We went through the 4-step positioning process in detail. You got to have good structure, good targeted liquidity, good equilibrium, good price and balance. Your key level is only as good as the steps, right? This is how you form a key level, right? So I've made lots of videos about key levels, higher time frame bias, etc. I recommend checking those out. If one leg is missing, the entire table falls. So just remember this analogy over here. Your key level is basically where your trade goes. So if your key level is wonky, then your trade is going to be wonky and wobbly, right? What you should take away from this video, or what you should take away from this slide, is that you've got to make sure all 4 legs are tight, stable, and well connected to the tabletop, right? And then the final thing we went through is the V3 volume vol. So being able to take your levels, combine them with volume, and then time to get the best overall results. And so if you like this video, give it a like, give it a thumbs up, and I look forward to releasing the FlowState OS app with everyone who comments below.